It's The Log. I'm Charles Purcell. It's week 120 for Greta Thunberg's climate strike. Just thought I'd give her a shout out. She's still out there every Friday, getting it done. You gotta love her, the lone voice out there. I mean, sure, there are good people trying to do good things, right? But then it's kind of disheartening to wake up and see a headline like this: Biden adjusting agenda to reflect narrow divide in Congress. No kidding. Let me read a little bit from this AP story. Alexandra Jaffe. President-elect Joe Biden is adjusting the scope of his agenda to meet the challenges of governing with a narrowly divided Congress. Of course. Rather than immediately pursue ambitious legislation to combat climate change, the incoming administration may try to wrap provisions into a coronavirus aid bill. Biden's team is also considering smaller-scale changes to the Affordable Care Act while tabling the more contentious fight over creating a public option to compete with private insurers. Oh, God. You know, was there anything in this world more predictable than this headline today? Biden is already working on an array of executive actions to achieve some of his bolder priorities on climate change and immigration without having to navigate congressional gridlock. Okay, so there's something. Presidents do have quite a lot of power in their executive orders, something that you and I have complained about. You know, when you have a decent moral person in the Oval Office, then that could be a good thing, that power. But then that same power sits there waiting for the next tyrant to roll in. So I've never been a really big fan of the executive order. I guess we'll have to take what we can get. Barack Obama finally went to it in his final couple of years in office. He tried and he tried and he tried. Oh, my God. Just bent over backwards for years to work with the Republicans, where all of us are just shouting from the wings, Barack, what are you doing? They have vowed to block you at every turn. The night you were elected, they made that vow. Just, anyway, that's old news. Anyway, so, the last couple of years, he did take advantage of the executive order and did lots of good things. But, yeah, the Orange Menace rolls in and just reverses everything. That's what the next president can do. Same thing with the courts. When you rely on the courts, we've also talked about this. When you rely on the courts to get you what you need, well, another court can just strike it down. We got to make this thing work. Laws don't really have any teeth or lasting power unless they are A, bipartisan, and B, enacted through Congress into law. This we know. This we know. For good or for bad. A good law, a bad law. I'm not designating at this point. Any law doesn't have teeth or lasting power unless enacted through Congress by law. That's the way we have to do things. Which means we have to have a functioning Congress, which means they have to reflect the will of the people, which means we have to have democracy in this country, which we currently do not have. So, to the shock of absolutely no one, before even raising his right hand, Joe Biden is backing down, adjusting the scope of his agenda, facing the realities of a divided Congress. It ain't working. This thing ain't working. Well, I'm sure I don't need to tell you this, but just to note the reality of things today. Over 3,000 COVID deaths in one single day. Numbers we never imagined in our worst nightmares. Over 205,000 new cases in a single day. Again, beyond our fears and imagination. Just incredible. Oh, well, what's to be said? I don't know what's to be said. We're just not strong enough to handle this, I guess. I mean, sure, if not for the Orange Menace and his callous, inept response, if not for all those who care little about death and only about profits, if not for them, things might have been a little better. Much of this was preventable. We know this. But we're at a point now, I'm trying to remember the phrase. What is it? The cow has left the barn or something? The gate is open? There's no going back. We just are where we are. The deplorables are hopeless, and it's a years, decades-long project to either shame them into oblivion or somehow create a world in which they can find some redemption. And it's not just the deplorables. I have people in my own life, people who I love and respect, who traveled on Thanksgiving, who gathered together, multiple households in one gathering. We're starting to get the data here from the travel industry. And over Thanksgiving, travel was down from last year, but only by a small amount. Just incredible to me to see these numbers. Vehicle travel on Thanksgiving Day was only about 5% less than last year. How is that possible? Airports saw some of their busiest days of the pandemic. The Transportation Security Administration screened more than 1 million passengers on 4 separate days during the Thanksgiving travel period. As we crush records thought unimaginable just weeks ago. We're human. We're weak. We've given up. But Greta Thunberg, still out there. Skålsträck för klimatet. Not sure I pronounced that correctly. Strike for climate. Strike for the climate. I'm sure Amy Goodman would know how to pronounce that. She's getting worse, by the way. Let me give my regular plug for Amy Goodman's Democracy Now! If you're not watching Democracy Now! Or listening to the podcast, you honestly don't have a good take on what's going on in the world. Democracy Now! Is the best. And I like to tease Amy Goodman because she overpronounces, just comically overpronounces non-English words and names. She calls Greta Thunberg Greta Thunberg. I heard she said Afghanistan the other day. She can't even say Afghanistan. She had to say Afghanistan. Her co-host is Normin Sheikh, and she has to say Normin Sheikh. She just, I mean, okay, good for her. She's making an effort, but it's just kind of funny. But all of that notwithstanding, you gotta be watching or listening to Democracy Now! I'm begging you. The one thing in your news menu, if nothing else, you gotta be checking out Democracy Now! At least the first, 18, 20 minutes when they do the headlines. Then they'll go to interviews, and if you miss that, your life's not over. It's still great stuff. I mean, the guests they're able to come up with and the stories they're able to cover are fantastic. But if nothing else, get the first 18, 20 minutes of Democracy Now! Every day. There's my plug again. Oh, hey, the monolith story. We talked about, and everybody's talking about. So first we had Utah, then we had Romania. I don't know, maybe there have been more I don't know about. The one I do know about is one in California that came and went in like a day. Stadium Park Hillside in Atascadero, California. On Tuesday it appeared. So I'm sure you know this, right? These monoliths are appearing. No one knows who's erecting them. This one, similar to the others, 3-sided, 10-foot tall, 200-pound monolith. Like I said, first one in Utah, then one in remote Romania. But now the one in California is an especially sad story because, well, this is why we can't have nice things. You and I talked the other day about how delightful this is, and that's the word. I love these monoliths showing up out of nowhere. It's just fun. And whoever would be cynical about this or not entertained by this, I just don't understand. Well, now here's an angle to the story that is really just so sad. Reading from the AP story. Days after the discovery and swift disappearance of two shining metal monoliths half a world apart, another towering structure has popped up and then quickly vanished, this time from the pinnacle of a trail in California. After photos were posted on social media, the tall silver metallic structure drew hikers to the top of the Pine Mountain Trail in Atascadero Park, halfway between San Francisco and Los Angeles. The monolith was similar to two others discovered recently in the Utah desert and in Romania. Like those structures, the origin of the California edifice is also unknown. Now, here's the part that's very sad. By Thursday, the California monolith had vanished, apparently torn down by a group of young men that traveled 5 hours from farther south to remove it, the city of Atascadero said in a Facebook post. Video posted online, I saw this video, it's really just so sad. Shows a group of young men wearing night vision goggles toppling what appears to be the monolith before dawn while chanting, "Christ is King" and "America First." One man also was heard saying to the camera, "We don't want illegal aliens from Mexico or outer space." The men replaced the structure with a wooden cross, which also disappeared. All that was left Thursday of the monolith were a few pieces of supporting rebar. Reportedly, police are reviewing the video. See, we can't have nice things. The people in this little California hamlet, the mayor and others, were very happy to have it. They thought it was kind of cute and fun and entertaining, like any decent person should feel. And the deplorables have gone so far that they have to drive 5 hours chanting "Christ is King" and "America First" and destroying and removing this thing. How sad is that? What kind of people do we share this planet with? I don't understand. See, this is why we can't have nice things. Like mysterious monoliths. Or a functioning Congress. Or democracy. We can't have nice things. I'll never understand it. I'll never understand it. My two conservative social media friends who I talk about occasionally, they popped up again. By the way, I want to catch myself here. We've got to stop using the word conservative. I really believe. Let's take that out of our lexicon, shall we? It doesn't mean anything anymore. These folks are not conservative in any sense of that word. The capital C conservative that we've all used as an easy shorthand to understand the right-leaning part of the political spectrum, that really is no longer a viable shorthand because there's nothing conservative about these folks. I'm not sure what to call them until we come up with something better. Radical right-wing? I'm not sure. I use deplorables all the time as my shorthand. Maybe that can become more common. But the two deplorables in my social media, who I keep around just to sort of keep an eye on them, you know, one of them is still posting about mask wearing, still to this day, just refuses to accept the scientific reality of masking and social distancing, of the virus itself. The capacity for delusion is really remarkable. I said two, actually, I've got three. I've got three right-wingers. I've got three deplorables I keep in my social media bubble because I feel a need to watch them, have that window open. So one of them is still just really obsessed with the whole mask and virus thing. Crazy. I'll never understand it. The other one is 100% convinced of all of the Orange Menace Giuliani lies regarding the election. that the Orange Menace won by a landslide, and it was only through massive fraud that Joe Biden is president-elect. Completely, 100% in. How is this possible? This is the theme of my day today. I'm flabbergasted. And then the third of my little trio, who I talk about occasionally, he owns a bar and restaurant and entertainment venue. I'm really tempted to say his name and the name of his business. One of these days, I'm going to break, and I'm going to do it. Up until now, I've always left out those details, but he just continues. In the midst of the pandemic, he's been the one fighting and fighting in his very righteous tone about keeping businesses open and about freedom and about how the virus is a hoax and all of his customers are family. Just goes over the top with his sentimentality about his business and his clientele. And he claims to have protocols in line, just enough to remain open and to make the authorities happy. But once you get inside that place, I have no doubt at all that there's very little mask wearing, very little social distancing. And he's constantly advertising. He's a big promoter for his events. So just last weekend, he had another big event, splashed all over social media for people to come down. And it's a charity for some local charity he chose, teaches martial arts to kids. That's the other thing about charity. We can go on, and we have. You and I have talked about my disdain for private charity because those with the means to decide which charities get chosen, well, then they can make that decision. They got the money to do it. So there's nothing democratic about it. So of all the things going on in the world, he chooses some buddy of his who teaches martial arts to kids. Fine. It's probably a nice little operation. I don't know. But he just wears this on his sleeve like he's some damn big philanthropist and splashes all over social media, this big benefit concert. Come on down. And while you're here, have lots of drinks and a big dinner. And 10%. 10% of my profits are going to go to martial arts for kids. So just come on out, defy COVID protocols, and I'll toss a piddling 10% to some dumb little local charity, and I'll use them to prove what a great guy I am and to promote my business. 10%. Now, benefit concert, I'm not sure what that meant. That meant the musicians worked for free? Probably. I don't know. I don't know what benefit concert means. So in a little bit of good news, speaking of recommendations, I hope you're subscribed to Heather Cox Richardson. She's a history professor at Boston College, and she has taken to writing a daily journal on the news of the day from her perspective, and it's very, very good. So if you're not already familiar with Heather Cox Richardson, you should check her out, like her in social media, however you follow her and get her daily posts. She writes something that I want to share with you today, and it's a little bit of good news. Reading now from her post yesterday. There are signs that change is in the wind. For all his drama, Trump is losing relevance. Today, Congress finalized its draft of the defense authorization bill, and in it, members of both parties pushed back on Trump's demands. They refused to reduce the number of troops in Germany and South Korea, as he announced he would do in what appeared to be an attempt to weaken U.S. ties to Europe and the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, NATO. Congress also ignored Trump's demands to strip technology companies of liability protections. Apparently, he is angry. We talked about this so-called Section 230. Apparently, he is angry when insulting names for him trend on Twitter. And his insistence that he would veto any measure that called for renaming military bases currently named for Confederate generals, a plan endorsed by members of both parties. The measure also more directly rebukes Trump for things he either has already done or hasn't done and should have. It orders the Secretary of Defense to report on Russian bounties offered to Taliban-linked fighters in Afghanistan for killing U.S. troops, limits how much military funding the president can move to domestic projects, as Trump tried to do for his border wall, and requires that federal law enforcement officers visibly display their names and the names of their agency when engaged in public responses. This summer, the officers dispatched to the streets of Washington, D.C. and other cities could not be identified. In another rebuke to the summer's police violence, the measure also prohibits the Pentagon from handing off bayonets, certain combat vehicles, and weaponized drones to state and local enforcement. So this is all good. And thank you, Heather Cox Richardson, for pointing this out. I hadn't caught these details. Now, it's still a $1 trillion defense bill, and we need to cut the defense budget by about 90%. So all of that is still in play. But these are all little bits of good news. And the fact that they're not kowtowing to the Orange Menace on every little detail of American life and legislation, okay. A little bit of good news on an otherwise pretty weird, scary week. She also writes, I'll share this as well. It is not just Congress that is pushing back on the president. Today, the Associated Press broke the story that within the last 2 weeks, a political operative Trump had installed at the Department of Justice has actually been banned from the building after pressuring staffers to give her information about investigations. Yeah, this is quite a story. I read this. Heidi Stirrup is her name. The appointee is an ally of Trump advisor Stephen Miller. Josh Marshall of Talking Points Memo notes that it's unlikely a Trump ally would have been physically removed from the Justice Department in the days before the election turned Trump into a lame duck. So, okay, let's take our good news where we can get it. The Justice Department booted her. You must go now. Yeah, apparently this and there have been stories over the years, but it always falls down on the list of news items, and we miss it. But yeah, this is something he's done. There are these positions in all the agencies. They're basically White House liaisons. I guess that's what they're called. And that's fine. You have to have coordination between the White House and the various agencies. I mean, after all, the president is the executive, right? So that's fine. But the Orange Menace has been using these positions to basically infiltrate spies for his nefarious purposes. And they finally had enough over at Justice of Heidi Stirrup, and they said, you must go now. They kicked her out of the building. Of course, he immediately appointed her to the board of visitors of the Air Force Academy, whatever that is. So I guess do your spying over there. So just a little sliver of good news. Because as we know, and as you and I have talked about, he and Bootlicker Bill and Stephen Miller behind the scenes and who knows who else, they're doing everything they can to sabotage the incoming administration, just make things harder for them. And he's attempting to wield his power right to the bitter end regarding environmental regulations. We talked about this heinous idea he's got for federal death sentences, including a firing squad. He wants to bring back the firing squad just because that's who he is. But just a little bit of good news there from, again, Heather Cox Richardson. Thanks for that, and I recommend her. Well, while we're in Washington, let me also weigh in on the COVID relief. Pelosi and the House Democrats started at $3 trillion when they passed their bill 100 years ago. It's been back and forth ever since. But with the election of Joe Biden, I am now in favor of that $900 billion compromise. Now, we've actually gone below the Republicans' original counteroffer. The two extremes were always $3 trillion versus $1 trillion, and that kept getting whittling down from there through bargaining. But evil Mitch McConnell stopped anything from happening. But now with the $900 billion compromise, the Democrats have made all the concessions. And now it's to the point where Mitch McConnell, it's still not good enough for him. He's got his offer down to $500 billion. Well, again, the bull is out of the pen. That gate is swung open long ago. There's no going back. So we can't debate all those old issues anymore. We are where we are. And the fact that Joe Biden won the election changes everything. And for me, even someone who likes to stick to the guns and not compromise, I'm just absolutely happy with this $900 billion. Because now we know a brand new administration is coming in, a brand new Congress is coming in, and further steps can be taken. Now, 6 months ago, I never would have been saying this. It's only with the results of the election that this is now okay. So I just thought I'd weigh in on that. Not sure where you are. Do you agree with that? Yeah, take the $900 billion. Absolutely. $300 a week supplemental to those on unemployment, down from $600 a week in the original. Yeah, tons of compromises. But you know what? Get it done. Today. Just get it done. The Orange Menace doesn't care. He'll sign it. Doesn't matter at this point. And then as we go forward, don't worry, I haven't lost my fight. I'm not willing to bend and compromise to the deplorables. This is a special case. As we go forward here, I'm going to ask Joe and the Democrats in Washington to go big, go bold. You want to stick with your game plan of being FDR. That was the whole thing. That's what you've been saying for months and months. You're going to be FDR. Don't give up on that idea. At this point, I think it's better to fight for what's right and lose than to compromise yourself down into ineffectual, meaningless legislation. So on everything from climate change to the virus to Medicare for all, everything, all of it, immigration, go big, go bold. And if you win, great. If you lose, you did the right thing. And then in the midterms coming up in 2 years, you can stand on that stump and say confidently and honestly to all the voters, this is what we believe. This is what we tried to accomplish. This is what we did accomplish. And over here is what the Republicans prevented us from accomplishing. And run on that. Don't give up before you even take the oath of office and whittle away at what we all know needs to be done. Continue with your one step forward, two steps back strategy. Then you got nothing but half-assed legislation that really doesn't accomplish anything. And then you're running in 2 years on that? Well, yeah, we don't really get things done, and we don't really fight for anything, but vote for us anyway. It's bad policy and it's bad politics. You said you're going to be FDR. Be FDR. Do it. Congress, go big. Listen to your progressive caucus. Go big, win or lose, and then run on it. There's my advice for this Friday, this beautiful Friday, where the news is mostly bad, but we keep looking. We keep looking for the sweetness. Whoever's erecting monoliths, you're my hero of the day. Keep those monoliths coming. All right. Have a great weekend. You know I love you. I'm Charles Purcell. Talk to you Monday.